How's that look? Do you see it and hear me? Shake your head if you can hear me.
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. All right. All right. So the first thing I'd like to start off with the equipment that I use. Now, some of you may know of a photographer named Bill Fortin. He's been in the photo business for like 40 years, and he worked at Nikon actually for 10 years. And I ran into Bill at one of the photo conferences I was speaking at, and Bill says, Mike, he says, I know you're using our D7000 camera, but how come you're not using our pro bodies? And I says, well, Bill, I says, a good 60% of the people that go through my workshops are using cameras at $1,000 or less. I said, if I'm using your $6,500 camera, those people leave my workshop saying, well, Mike's images look really good because he's got an expensive pro camera, and I only have a camera that's $1,000, so I'm not going to get images as good as Mike does. Well, my camera is 10 years old, and I'm still using it, and that camera sold for $896 when it was discontinued. So my camera is under $1,000, and I'm still using it. And the point is to the people that come into my workshops that are using those less expensive cameras that you don't have to have an expensive camera for macro photography. Now, I'm not going to tell you that my camera would be good for, say, a bird photographer shooting birds in flight where they need high frames per second, or a sports photographer, or maybe you shoot in low light conditions a lot and you need high ISO with low noise. Well, my camera's not going to do those things, but we don't require that for macro photography. That's not important to us. So anything that you have camera-wise, even a $500 entry-level DSLR, I can take those cameras and produce images that I get published in magazines. So know that whatever camera body you have, you can take great macro shots with it. My lenses that I carry are only two of them. It's a 90mm Tamron macro lens that sells for $649. My 18-400 Tamron zoom lens, $649. My tripod's $180. And my ball head is $329. Now, altogether, that camera equipment comes to $2,703. Now, you look down below, just those camera bodies, just the body themselves, $29.99 for the 850 Nikon. So that's a couple $100 more than all my equipment together. And D6, the professional model, is thousands and thousands of dollars more than all my equipment put together. And I make a living doing this. So you can spend a little less as a macro photographer, and actually could even spend less than what I've spent, because you see that ball head's probably a little pricier than maybe some people's ball heads. So you don't have to have quite as much money invested as a macro photographer. Now, as far as brands go, I don't really care what brand you own. I've seen them all in my workshops. They all do excellent, make excellent images. The only reason I use Nikon, because some people say, why are you using Nikon? When I started in 2004, I actually started with Fuji cameras based on a photographer friend told me he was using the Fuji digital cameras, and that's kind of where I started with digital, is 2004. And that camera that I owned was based on Nikon body. So basically, Fuji just put their name on it, but they were actually using Nikon bodies. And then Tamron sponsored me, so they provided lenses that were mounted for Nikon cameras. And when I bought the D7000, I wanted the live view, and that's the only reason I upgraded, was because I wanted live view. And I ended up buying Nikon because my lenses were already mounted for Nikon. Other than that, if the Fuji cameras would have been based on a Canon camera, I'd probably be using Canon right now. I just don't feel that any of the brands are one's better than the other. They all do great work for macro photography, that is. All right, so the macro lenses, they come in short range, mid range, and long range focal lengths. And these are the ones that are the most common. These are the ones that I see on a regular basis in my workshops. In the short focal length, you see there's a 60mm. Now, Tamron, Nikon, and Canon makes a 60, but the Sigma is actually a 50mm, so that's their short focal length. In the mid range, on the low end of the mid range, is the Tamron 90mm. The Canon is a 100, and then the Nikon and Sigma have 105s. And then when you get into the telephoto, the long range macro lenses, Sigma is on the low end of 150, and then the 180 has always been the most popular of the longer telephoto macro lenses. But Tamron probably a year and a half ago, decided that they were going to discontinue their 180, and I heard rumor that Sigma was going to discontinue theirs as well. So that would leave Canon with the 180. And then in the longest of the true macro lenses that go down to 1:1 magnification, it's a Nikon 200. Now in the upper right corner, you'll see a short lens that's on, that's my old Fuji S5. That's probably about 11 years ago. When I shot this. Now, photographing this Roses Sharon flower, and if you know that flower, it's a pretty good sized flower. It's not a small flower. And I wanted to fill the frame with that flower. So with the 60 millimeter, you can see I have to get very close to that flower to get that shot you see up in the upper left corner. About probably 12 inches away with the 60 millimeter. So I don't have a lot of working distance between me and that subject. The image below is the 90 millimeter, so you can see it's a little bit longer lens. And in order to get the exact same framing, the exact same shot as I did with the 60, but using the 90, I had to move back away from the subject. So now I'm getting more working distance between me and that subject. And then the image on the bottom, you see that's a 180. You can see that's a big, heavy lens. And now I've got a lot of working distance between me and the subject to get the exact same framing. And why is that important? Well, because if that flower was a live subject, like say a butterfly or a dragonfly or any type of live subject, it probably wouldn't be too happy if I'm 12 inches from its face with a 60 millimeter lens. It's probably going to fly away. But if I'm using a 180 or a longer telephoto lens, then I have more working distance and much likelier that that subject is going to stay there and not take off. So a lot of the people that shoot a lot of live subjects tend to like to use the longer telephoto macro lenses for that working distance. If you're, just shooting just stationary subjects all the time, like flowers and things that aren't going to fly away on you, then you could get by with the shorter focal lengths. I don't recommend a 60 millimeter outside in the short range because, as you see, you've got to get really close to your subject. And, if you're shooting things that are low to the ground, you're going to be on your hands and knees a lot. So the mid ranges, you get a little extra working distance. And I would say 80% of the people that come through my workshops are using mid-range lenses. And the reason why they choose to buy those mid-range lenses is because it's in the price range that they can afford or they want to pay. A lot of people might like to have the longer telephoto macro lens, but they start getting up into that, $1,500, $1,800 price range. And a lot of people say, I'm not spending that much money for a lens. So most of them will get into the mid-range because, my Tamron 90 sells for $649, and maybe a little extra money you could get a Nikon or Canon mid-range. So that's why most people end up in the mid-range, and they work fine. I mean, I use a mid-range macro lens. Now, Hunts is going to offer up a whole bunch of discounts on the equipment that I'm talking about, and they are generous enough to give away 20% on the Tamron lenses that I'm talking about. So that's a really good deal because typically camera stores don't give you discounts on lenses and camera bodies. So that's a pretty good deal if you're looking for a lens right now. Now, they also have new lenses that have come out in the last few years. Most all companies have these now. They're zoom lenses that say they have macro capabilities. Now, it doesn't mean they're true macro lenses. It just means they can get in close on subjects, at least closer than a standard zoom lens will. Now, a true macro lens will say it goes to 1:1 magnification, all right? And what that means is that when you are at the minimum focusing distance of that lens, so in my case, my Tamron 90, it says that the minimum focusing distance is 11.5 inches from the subject. Now, that's from the sensor inside the camera, not the front of the lens. Some people think it's from the front of the lens to the subject, but it's actually the sensor inside the camera. So when I get to that 11.5 inches to the subject, I hit that minimum focusing distance, I'm actually in that 1:1 magnification. And so what happens is whatever I have framed at 1:1, I'm actually reproducing the actual size of that subject right onto my sensor. And that's what a true macro lenses do. They will produce 1:1 magnification, life-size reproduction. So this zoom lens that I have, which is the 18-400 Tamron, says it has some macro capabilities, but again, not 1:1, but it's going to be like a 1:2.7 or 1:3. It'll shoot into a pretty small area, which you'll see in a second, but it's not going to get you into 1:1. But what I like about having this 18-400 is that if I want to show a landscape type shot, in this case here, I'm shooting in this swampy area where I'm photographing leaves floating on the water. And I want to show you that environment that I'm in. I can set up that 18-400 on another camera on a tripod and take a picture of myself out there. So it's nice having that wide angle to be able to do that. And then if I'm shooting, at the edge of a pond and there's a frog's head peeking out of the duckweed, I've got 400 millimeters and I can reach out and capture that frog. Whereas if I was using my 90 millimeter macro lens, I'd literally have to be in the water with the frog to get this same framing. So you need that longer reach of that lens. What's nice about this lens also is that, I shoot a lot in botanical gardens and you have to stay on the pathway. You can't walk into the plants and flowers and stuff. So if I have to stay on that pathway, I at least have a lens that can reach out to capture subjects at a distance. Whereas with my fixed macro lenses, I would literally have to walk in there to get close to those subjects. Now this is only for a crop sensor body, this lens, all right? So if you have a full frame camera, then this won't work on your full frame. So you'd have to go with the 28-300 Tamron for your full frame. This is only for a crop sensor body. Now, as I said, this lens does shoot in a pretty small area, okay? So this is a little succulent that I photographed, and it'll actually photograph as small as 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. That's a really small area, all right? That's a tiny area. Now, 90% of what I photograph is larger areas than 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So this does, a big portion of the work that I do. I would say probably 90% of the things I photograph, like I said, are larger areas in this. So I could literally just use this for 90% of my photography. So it's a great lens. Produces good sharp images, never had any problems with it. Now, if I need to get into a smaller 1-to-1 magnification, I can always pull out my Tamron 90, and then I can get into a really small area. Now that Tamron 90, when I'm shooting at the 1-to-1, will actually cover an area as small as 7/8 of an inch by 1 3/8 inches. That's really small. So I very rarely do I shoot anything that small of an area, so I don't use it for that much, and I basically use it for my flower photography and critter photography. But I can still do that with my 18-400 now. Now the tripod that I use is the brand new Vanguard VO3 Plus. This is the upgraded version to the discontinued Ultra Pro 2 Plus. Which I've been using them for the last few years, and we sold tons of those. Hunts and I sold tons of them, and a lot of happy customers that bought that Ultra Pro 2 Plus. But this new Vanguard VO3 Plus has had some really nice upgrades put into it, and it's really a nice quality tripod. Now, Gary has ordered them. They're not quite yet at their store yet, but he does have a link that you're going to get that you can kind of put your order in, and they're going to be in here into their stores any day now, so they can ship it out to you as soon as they get it. But you can go ahead and put your order in, because I know he only has so many coming in, and there's going to be a lot of people ordering this. Now the tripod has the ability for the center post to rise up, and then it'll go horizontal, as you see here. And that's what makes this a great tripod for macro. Now, Manfrotto's had a tripod that horizontal went straight out, like you see, like this. But the problem with the Manfrotto is if I needed to move that camera closer to that tree trunk that you see I'm photographing or farther away, I'd literally have to do it with the 3 legs. But with the Vanguard, they have a little lever there that you can release, and that center post will actually move up and down, so we can move the camera closer to the subject or farther away. Nice thing too is that if you want to get that tripod out of your way, you can move that center post out like you see here, and photograph your subjects without the tripod being in your way. And then the legs will go straight out, so that you can literally put the base of the tripod right directly onto the ground, and you can shoot subjects really, really low to the ground like you see there. And then what's really cool about the tripod, really nice feature that they added, is that you can unscrew one of the legs and it turns into a monopod. So this is nice for people that are shooting maybe in botanical gardens where they say, there's no tripods allowed in the botanical garden. You can unscrew one of your legs and it'll turn into a monopod for you. So that was another nice feature they added in there. Now, the one thing about the new tripod that they have right now, it comes with a ball head, and it actually is a very nice ball head. So you do get the whole thing for $249, the tripod and the head for $249, and then Gary's got 10% off on it right now, so you get $25 off on it. So, but excellent tripod. All right, the ball head that you probably all are using has a big metal housing like you see here, and then balls up to the top there. Also has a little U slot. Every ball head I've ever used always had a little U slot in the front here, and that's where we maneuver our camera when we're shooting downward. We maneuver into that little U slot so we can position the camera shooting down towards the ground, and we do that a lot. We tend to use that U slot, and then we might have to pivot the ball head back and forth. So we're a little bit limited because we have to work in that U slot, and sometimes you go to put your camera down and the U slot's not lined up and you have to turn the head, and it's a little bit of a hassle. But it works, but a little bit more inconvenience. Now, the head that I'm using is the Acratech ball head. It's called the Ultimate ball head, and you can see they've cut away all that big metal housing like you saw in the last one. So this is super lightweight. I would say that is the lightest ball head that's on the market if you're concerned about weight. It's also made out of aluminum, so that makes it much lighter too. Now, the key to this head is the front 45 degrees has been cut away. See, all that area is missing in the front, so there's no U slot that I have to work into. I have complete full range of movement of my camera. When I'm framing my subjects, I have no problem getting into position because I don't have to work in a U slot anymore. That just frees me up to move wherever I need to go with my camera. So it is the best head for macro photography because we are constantly maneuvering our camera in all types of different positions for framing. Unlike, say, a landscape or wildlife photographer, they just shoot straight ahead. So for them, it's not a big deal. But for macro photography, this is a big deal. Now, this head is a little bit pricey, runs $329. There are heads out there that are more expensive than that, but there's a lot of heads that are less expensive. So it's not an inexpensive ball head, but it's really worth the money, I got to tell you, if you do a lot of macro photography. And of course, it's good for any type of photography. Now, there'll also be a sale price on the Ultimate ball head when you get your links sent out to you. Now, accessories that I carry, I got quite a few little accessories, but the most important one is the diffuser. And because I didn't have time to cover every accessory today, I want to at least cover the most important accessory, and that's the 12-inch diffuser. Now, this is a Dame's rocket flower, and you can see the top portion of the flower looks kind of pinkish color. So you think, well, maybe these petals are, pink, but they're not supposed to be. They're actually supposed to be purple. Now, you know that if you're shooting on a sunny day and the light is harsh, it's coming down at the right angles, it can wash out the colors on your subject. And you've probably seen that before when you shoot on sunny days. That's why landscape photographers tend to shoot early morning, late evening, because the midday lights gets kind of harsh. But this is actually photographed on a cloudy day. So even on cloudy days, when we have subjects that are running parallel to the sky, the petals like you see here, that light that's coming from overhead in those clouds is intense enough to wash out the colors of that subject. So what you need to do is get yourself a 12-inch diffuser. I've never used anything larger than this. It's just a nice little 12-inch circle. It'll actually collapse and fold into about 4 inches, so it can literally fit into your pocket. And these are inexpensive. They normally run about $15, but Hunts is going to sell it to you for $9.95. So there's no reason why you should not have that in your in your bag. Okay. Now what we want to do with this 12-inch diffuser is place it right directly over our subject when we're seeing those colors are being washed out. So on that Dame's rocket, once I put that 12-inch diffuser over top of it, it brings the color back to the natural color. So you can see the image on the left that is with no diffuser. The image on the right is with the diffuser position over top. It's like a magic trick when you see it happen. It's amazing when you see the colors where they're washed out and they go to full color once you put that diffuser over top. And again, even on a cloudy day, you can get enough intensity of the light and the clouds coming down that's going to wash out those colors. Now, on that same cloudy day, I was walking down a path and I saw this leaf and I thought, boy, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You see the top portion of that leaf? That part is running parallel to the sky. And that is the area that has lost its color and is completely washed out. But the front of the leaf is dipped down 90 degrees to the sky so it retains its color. All right, so what we do is, again, put that diffuser right over top and it brings the color back. All right. Now, the color is not 100% on the top portion there like it is in the front, but there's enough color there now that I can go into post-processing. I can darken that top portion down to make it match up with the front portion. But the image on the left, color is gone. There's no color there. I can't bring that back. Okay. So get yourself a 12-inch diffuser and make sure you have it with at all times. Now, on sunny days, I am diffusing my subject 100% of the time. 100% of the time on sunny days. And the reason being, because there's three things that happen on a sunny day. One is that it can alter the color of your subject when the sun hits it. Number two is that it can wash out colors just like it does on cloudy days. We can lose colors and wash colors out. And then number three is it can create shadows in areas that I don't want shadows. I just want a nice even light, no shadows, and I want the right color, okay? So you can see on the left image, that's a sumac branch, and that is early morning sunlight hitting that branch, and you can see it's turned those leaves to a yellowish green. That's what it's saying, it's altered the color of the leaves. Now I put my diffuser between the branch and the sunlight, and you can see the image on the right side. It brings it back to the natural green color it's supposed to be, okay? So sunny days, I'm diffusing 100% of the time. Cloudy days, depending on the colors and if they're washed out by the overhead light. So I have to make sure that I have that with me every single time I go out, no matter what the weather conditions. Sometimes I use it indoors. There's times when I'm shooting subjects that have a little sheen to the petals, or like this little succulent here, and the light hits it at the right angle, and it can wash out some, or create little hot spots. We call them little white spots. And so sometimes I even have to use that indoors when I'm shooting. So again, it's a real important tool. Now you're wondering, do I have to hold this thing all the time? Well, you could hold it when you're out in the field, or you could buy a clamp. Now the clamp is designed with a large clamp on the left side, as you can see here, and that can clamp onto your tripod leg. And then it has a flexible tubing, and at the other end, it has another clamping system that you can put your diffuser into, all right? So they can hold your diffuser. And it can also be set up to hold a stem of a flower on a windy day. You can clamp it onto the stem of a flower. Now, if you're in real close to your subject, this would work if you attached it to the leg of the tripod. It might have enough reach. But let's say you're using a longer telephoto macro lens or a zoom lens like I have, and you're 3-4 feet away from your subject. Attach that to the tripod leg, you're not going to have enough flexible tubing to reach out and put your diffuser over your subject. So what Wimberley did is they came up with a stake system, and you can purchase this stake system, put it into the ground next to the subject you're going to photograph, and then you can attach the clamp system onto the stake, and then in this picture here, it shows you can clamp onto the stem of a flower, or you can put your diffuser in there and position your diffuser over top of your subject. So that way you don't have to hold it. You can just work your camera back and forth and let the clamp system hold your diffuser for you. This is something that Gary sent to me just a couple weeks ago. Now, I have a lot of people, as you saw earlier with the tripod, I'm down on my hands and knees a lot, and I'm in decent enough shape that I can get down and get back up. But I have a lot of people that'll say, if I get down on the ground, I'm not getting back up. So it doesn't work for everybody to get down on the ground like I do. So Gary told me, he says, we got this really, interesting collapsible stool for those that, want to sit to shoot rather than get down on the ground. And so he sent me one. It works really, really well. It's got, it's just a little circle like you see here. It's only 9.5 inches wide by 2.5 inches, high, as you can see here. So it's real thin and real portable. And then you can see here, it expands out. You can open it so that you can go to as high as 17.7 inches high, or anything in between there. So you can go to a different adjustable heights and stop it. And you've got a really sturdy seat. I'm like 210 pounds, and I sat on it and I didn't feel like it was, wobbly or it wasn't safe or anything. So excellent, excellent stool. So he'll have that on sale for you too on those links. Now the light that I use is the LED light from Litra, L-I-T-R-A. It's a real small little compact light. It's about 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch, and it's got a really intense light. It's amazing how bright this thing is. And then it's a rechargeable system, so you don't have to put batteries in it. Now I use this for fill light. So I typically, the majority of my images I photograph are natural light. I don't use any flash, never use a flash. I just use the natural light that's available when I shoot. But there's times when there's areas that I'm photographing the subject where it's a little bit dark and I want to add a little bit of light into those dark areas. And so I can pull out this little LED light and shine it into those dark areas. So it's nice to have that little fill light once in a while. Again, I like this one best of all the LED lights I've used over the years because, again, it's so small and compact. It fits in a very small area in the backpack, and you don't have to have this large light like some of them are. So a great little light. And there'll also be a sale on that light as well when they send out the links to you. Now, all my indoor shooting is done in the stairway here. This is a foyer with a 2-story high ceiling, and it's got a huge picture window up top that floods the stairway with natural light. Now we do a lot of shooting indoors because in the winter when it's real cold outside and we don't really have much to shoot outside, I'll shoot indoors. And in the summer when it's real hot, I don't go outside too much, so I stay indoors and shoot. The stairways, again, is the best place in my house. It has the most natural light for shooting indoors. Problem is when you're shooting indoors is obviously I don't want stairs as my background behind my flowers, so I have to put some kind of background behind those flowers. Now, when I started out years ago shooting indoors, I was using black fleece and white backgrounds, and I got tired of the black and white backgrounds because to me it wasn't natural looking. I wanted to shoot flowers so that they looked like I shot them out in the field and produce a nice clean green background like I get when I shoot my flowers and bug portraits outside. So what I did was I went out to the local park near my house and I set up my tripod. I have my Tamron 90mm macro lens on my camera body, and I set the f-stop to 2.8. Remember that. Always set it at the smallest f-stop number, 2.8 or 3.5, depending on your macro lens. Now, when I'm manually focusing, which I do on all my macro shots, I always manual focus. I don't autofocus it. When I'm manually focusing on this subject, you see here, I've got it in focus right now. If I go a little bit left, a little bit right at the focus point, it starts to go out of focus. Now, what you want to do is take your ring of your focusing ring of your lens and go, turn it way, way, way to the left, and then maybe turn it way, way, way to the right. And one of the two ways, either left or right, will actually take this subject to a solid color. When I get it to a solid color, I photograph it, and that's that subject right there completely out of focus. So now I have a natural green background that was shot out in nature, and I can bring it indoors, put it behind my tulips or whatever I'm photographing that day, and have a natural, real natural background as if I shot that out in the field. So what you want to do is print this on a matte paper. Don't use any gloss or no semi-gloss, no lusters, anything, no sheen in that paper. You want it flat. So you want to get matte paper and print it on the matte paper. And then you can use these behind your subjects when you photograph. Now, maybe you're looking at this and thinking maybe you'd like to have a little bit of texture in there, a little blotchiness, all right? Here's a different subject. Now, in my lens, I have to turn it, the focusing ring all the way to the right. You can try yours, maybe it's left, maybe it's right, but mine goes to the right and it'll blur that out. Now, instead of taking this subject to a solid blur like I did with the first one you saw, I just don't take it all the way to solid. I leave a little bit of texture in there. So maybe you think that looks better with a little texture, a little more natural looking, okay? But that solid color, I get a lot of that in my flower photography and bug photography, and you'll actually see images that'll look just like that later. If you're shooting subjects that have some yellow flowers in there, you're going to get more of a yellowish green. And then if you shoot with some pink flowers in there, you'll get some pinks in there. So I like to go to botanical gardens where they have large plots of colorful flowers, and then I just take them out of focus, photograph them, and then I've got different shades of colors that I can use behind flowers when I'm shooting indoors. All right, now depth of field is the #1 issue that macro photographers struggle with. And whenever I ask someone that's kind of new to macro, I say, so what are you having problems with? They go, well, it's the depth of field. It's these f-stops. I'm not sure where I should put my f-stops, and I don't know how much depth of field I'm supposed to get at the different f-stops. It's actually not that difficult. This is actually pretty simple stuff, I think. It's just a matter of understanding how it works, but it's pretty simple. Now, at the opposite ranges of those f-stops, the low end and the high end, you can see on this image on the left here, I've got very little in focus, all right? Just a little tiny bit of focus right here. And that's done with the smallest f-stop number. So it could be a 2.8, 3.5, depending on your macro lens. All right, now this is a style of flower photography that a lot of macro photographers love. Okay, they love this soft focus look. And all they're doing is getting a very little bit of that subject in focus and a lot of softness in the background and in the foreground. So again, very popular style, but always done with the smallest f-stop to get that maximum softness. The image on the right side, you can see that's sharp focus from top to bottom, side to side, and front to back. And that's done with the highest f-stops. When I want maximum depth of field, I go up to f32 and shoot. Now here's another example of soft focus. I'll show you a few of these. And you can see all I have in focus, sharp focus, is the very edge of this petal here on this trillium flower, and right there. And that edge there is the closest to the front of my lens. I placed my focus there, and with the 3.5 on a 180 macro lens, it just softened into the flower and into the background. And then here's a little dragonfly. I focused on his face, and with the small f-stop number, it softened his body down, softened into the background. And then this fern here, just focused in this center area right in the middle there, right there. And then with that small f-stop, just softened down the top and the bottom. Now, I like the style of everything in focus. I have had all my success from images that were all in focus. So in other words, through contests, through selling in the art show business, magazine articles, they tend to want the images with everything in focus more than the soft focus. So I've had all my success with this style. Now, this is a nice shot of a rose. You can see again, top to bottom, side to side, front to back, all in focus, f32. Same with this agave. Everything in focus, f32. And then I found this little pair of critters here, a little hoverfly and a grasshopper sharing this black-eyed Susan, and I wanted to make sure it was all in focus. I shot it at the highest f-stop, f32. Now I'm going to show you these two opposite ranges here on this ruler. Put that ruler on the table. I got a 90 millimeter Tamron lens on the camera body, and I'm at an angle to that ruler. Some of you might think, well, why don't you get parallel to it? Well, that would be nice, but sometimes you can't always get parallel to subjects when you're shooting. So you have to learn how to shoot sometimes at bad angles. So at that closeness to that subject and at that angle to that subject, all I'm getting at the smallest f-stop 2.8 is 1/8 of an inch. That's it. Just like you saw in those little flower shots, they get very little in focus when you're shooting those small f-stops. Just that line right there and the other line right there, just outside of that 1/8 is already starting to go out of focus. And then you can see at the top and bottom, it eventually blurs into a solid color. Now, going to the other end of the lens, f32, you can see I can get it all in focus. Now, it's a little slightly soft at the very outer edges, because when you're in that close at that extreme angle to that subject, even at f32, you might not get totally sharpness all the way through, but there's enough sharpness there still that in post-processing, I can add the sharpening in and make it look sharp. All right, this is a spruce cone that I hung 4 feet in front of the spruce tree. Now remember that tree's 4 feet behind that spruce cone. Now I'm using a 180 macro lens. I'm at the smallest f-stop, which is 3.5. I focused on this flat part of the cone right here. All right. Now, remember what I said, shooting those small f-stops, very little depth of field, right? Well, even this little tip of this cone where it dips from the flat part down to this little tip is already out of focus. And then the needles here, these are in the foreground in front of that spruce cone, and those are out of focus. But you can see the background, which is 4 feet away, 3.5 doesn't have enough depth of field to pull in any real details of that spruce tree in the back. And that's good. That's what we want in our background. We want nice, clean backgrounds so it doesn't distract from our subject. Now here's the problem. 3.5 is doing a great job on the background, but the problem is it's not getting me enough depth of field on the subject. I want to get my subject all in focus. So we need to go to a little higher f-stop to get more depth of field on our subject. So let's go to f8. So we go up to f8. Now we're getting focus throughout the whole cone. So the cone's in focus, the tip's in focus. That's good. And the needle's not totally in focus. Better though. But look what happens at 4 feet. F8's got just enough depth of field to reach back, start pulling in some lights and darks and lines and things, and it's starting to clutter up the background. Well, we don't want to clutter up the background, but unfortunately, when we went to the F8, we brought in some of the background. Now, we still didn't get all the depth of field on the subject. So if we bump it up to F16, now we get full focus on the complete subject. Everything, needles and everything are totally sharp throughout the whole subject. But look what happens in my background. F16 now has enough depth of field to reach back and pull in those needles back there. So it's cluttering up my background. So this is where macro photographers struggle. See, they'll say, well, I like a nice blurred background, and I can do that when I'm shooting at the small f-stop, but then I don't get enough depth of field on my subject I'm shooting. And when I go to the higher f-stop to get it all in focus, then I bring in all the background and it gets cluttered up and it makes a mess. So that's where macro photographers struggle. They assume that it only has to do with the different f-stops we choose, okay? Which is part of it, but that's not the most important part. So these are images that I photographed out in the field. And you can see here I have a fully focused flower with a nice solid color background there. And again, these are all shot right out in the field. And there's a jewel weed with some dewdrops and a leaf with a dewdrop on it. And it's all tack sharp with a nice solid background. Remember that green I shot that I told you I got out of focus and I shot that green grass? It's the exact same green that I got here in this shot with grass in the background. And here we have a nice flower shot with everything in focus and another nice solid background. And critters, we want our critter portraits to be like that. We want our critters all in focus, and we want that nice clean background. And then here's a little hoverfly on a knapweed flower. And of course, we want all that in focus with that nice clean background. And the same with this dewy covered dragonfly with that nice clean background. That's a pond that was in the background, a blue pond. All right, so this is what we don't want. We don't want lights and darks and lines and all kinds of clutter that distract from our main subject. We want to get a nice clean background behind it. So this is how you do it. It's real simple. This is not technical or difficult stuff, okay? It's real simple. This is the key to flower and critter portraits. So we need to find the right subject. We need to find an isolated subject away from clutter, all right? And then we need to find the camera angle to that subject with the background as far away as possible. The farther that background moves away from that subject, the higher the f-stop can go. Now let's think about that spruce cone hanging 4 feet in front of that spruce tree. Now you remember that at 4 feet, 3.5 didn't have enough depth of field to pull in any of the details. But then when we moved up to the f8 to get more depth of field on my subject, we started to pull in those needles in the background. So what we need to do if we were to want to get into those higher f-stop, we need to move that background far away. So if we had that spruce tree positioned 10 feet behind the spruce cone, f8 wouldn't have enough depth of field to reach back 10 feet and pull in any of the needles. And if we move that tree to 20 feet behind that spruce cone, we could shoot at f11 to f16. And get that subject completely in focus and blur out that background because it's 20 feet away. All right, so this is really simple stuff. It's not hard. Now, the Dame's Rocket flower that I showed you earlier where I put the diffuser over top to bring the color back to the purple, this is the day I shot it. This is where I shot it. Now, when you come into a field like this, you're going to see a large clumps of flowers like this. They're all congested and close together. Now, you don't want to shoot any of the flowers in all this congested area because, again, if you figured out any of these here to photograph, you're going to have a background that's literally inches behind the flower. That's not going to work. What you want to do when you get to these areas is go to the perimeter, the outside perimeters, and look for the single flowers that are growing up all by themselves away from the main bunch of flowers. So this one right here, right in this area right here, if you can see my little arrow right there is where I chose that one, because you can see it's isolated away from all that clutter. And there's nothing behind it but a wooded area back there that's about 15 to 20 feet away. So I can get in there and shoot at f11s, maybe even a little higher, get that all in focus and blur out that background. So this is really not difficult. It's very easy. That's how it's done. It's pretty simple. Now, this is a little bladder campion flower. It's in this tall grass. And of course, you're not going to want to shoot that because, again, the background is literally inches behind it. But where this tall grass is growing up above, that same exact flowers, grew right straight through the grass, and it's way up high here, and there's nothing behind that flower but that wooded area back there. And again, it's far enough away that I can go into the F11s, F16s, get it all in focus and blur out that background. So this is how it's done. It's very simple. It's not hard at all. So we need to get into those at least F8s, F11s, sometimes F16s to get our subject all in focus when we're in really close to it. But we need that background to be as far away as possible so that we can blur that background out. Now here's a situation that, you've got these little daisies, oxeye daisies they're called, and they're scattered through all this tall grass. You can see them all through this tall grass growing, all right? So you get to this area and you go, well, I don't see a flower here with a background 10, 15, 20 feet away. So, this is going to be a problem. You have to learn when to walk away sometimes. There's going to be times when you're just not going to find that isolated flower with the background off in the distance. And you're going to get into a situation like this where you're going to say, well, it's not going to work. So let's just move on and go find something else to shoot. Rather do that than produce a poor quality image. Now you do have an option here. There is one option that you can use if you really need to get a shot of that oxeye daisy for whatever reason. You go, I have to get a shot at oxeye daisy. There is an option. You remember the backgrounds I showed you how to make? You're using them indoors, right? They're natural backgrounds from outdoors. You can take your backgrounds with you out into the field and pop it behind your flower and photograph it, just like you do when you're indoors. Same thing. All right. You can do it like I just taught you. You can search out that one flower that's isolated with the background off for a distance. But if you don't want to do that and you want to be lazy, which I have been the last couple of years, as I get older, I get a little lazier. You can just bring your backgrounds with you when you go out in the field and pop them behind it. You can use whatever f-stop you want, and you can get it all in focus and have that nice solid color background behind it that you shot and printed. Now, when you're going out to the field with these prints, obviously you don't want this thin paper floppy print to use, so you want to back it with something. So I use foam core, use mat board, I use cardboard, anything to put it on the back end of the print to make it stiff. And then that'll stiffen up that print so you can easily put it behind your subject. Now, if you don't want to hold it, you could always use your clamp system that I just told you. You could use, the clamp for holding your diffuser. Well, you can also hold your backgrounds behind your flowers with the clamp system. All right, so that's an option if you really want to get a shot of something, or if you just don't want to bother with trying to find an isolated flower with a background off in a distance. You can carry your backgrounds with you when you go out in the field and literally shoot as high as f-stop as you need to get it all in focus, and all you're going to do is reach back and capture that background you put behind it. So that's the option. Give yourself options again when you're shooting the f-stops. If you go out in the field and you just shoot a subject using one f-stop and you think you're done, and you get home and you look at that shot with that one f-stop and you're not happy with what you see, maybe you didn't get enough depth of field, maybe you got too much depth of field, whatever you choose to do, you may be unhappy with that shot, and you may not be able to go back and reshoot that subject, and it may not even be there when you go back to reshoot it. So while you're there and you've got your tripod set up and you're photographing your subject, shoot at least 3 to 5 different f-stops, okay? Don't just come home with one f-stop. Pixels are free. It doesn't cost anything. There's no reason why you're set up that you shouldn't be shooting at least 3, minimum 3, up to 5 different f-stops. And then when you get home, you've got the options and you can look at the different f-stops and decide which one worked out the best, okay? Now this is example what I'm talking about. I've got 2 calla lilies, set them up in my house, put a black felt background behind them. I'm using the smallest f-stop on this first shot, 2.8. You can see all I've got is a little bit in focus. Like I've been telling you, small f-stops give you very little in focus. All right, so background, you can see the flowers nice and soft. Now, when I said use 3 to 5 different f-stops, I didn't mean f-stops that were right next to each other. I mean skip a few f-stops, all right? So I shot this at the 2.8, and then I went up to the f8 for the second shot. So this is the f8 shot. You can see a little more details coming in on that flower in the background, a little more in the front flower. And then I went to f11, shot it again. So you see a little more details coming in, a little more sharpness. And then I went to f16, a little more sharpness, and then f22. So I got pretty much everything in focus to the f22. So now I can go back and I can look at these 5 different images and say, do I want everything in focus? Or do I want the f16 that gives me a little bit of softness on the flower in the background, or maybe a little more softness at the f11, or a little more at f8, or maybe maximum softness at the 2.8. So I've got 5 options. Again, don't come home with one f-stop. Shoot at least 3 to 5 different f-stops. All right, here's an example of, again, everything in focus, top to bottom, side to side, left to right. This was a pair of sunflowers I bought at a farmer's market near my home. Brought them home, put them on the floor in my foyer, just got the camera over top of them, photographed them. Shot it at f32, highest f-stop. Now, a lot of you are probably cringing right now because you're thinking, man, I've been told you should never shoot at high f-stops, because people tell me that you get diffraction when you shoot at those high f-stops, right? And so a lot of you would never go over f16. I have had people say, oh, I never shoot it over f11. And I'm thinking, well, why not? I do it all the time and I don't have any problem. So diffraction, what happens is that when you're shooting at f32, the aperture inside the lens, which opens and closes, okay? When you're shooting at the small f-stop, that aperture is wide open and it's a big opening. That allows a lot of light to come in. And then when you shoot it at the high f-stop, that aperture, it's really tiny. It shrinks down to a really small opening. Now, when your image is trying to squeeze through that tiny opening that you're going to photograph, as it's moving through that little opening, it has a tendency to shift and move a little bit after it goes through the opening. And then when it hits the sensor of your camera, it softens down the details in the subject you just photographed. It does not give you the sharpest quality out of the lens, and that's what's called diffraction, okay? Now, if you've all heard of the famous photographer Ansel Adams, right? I mean, he is literally the famous of all nature landscape photographers. Even people that aren't photographers have heard of Ansel Adams. That's how famous he is, okay? Now, in 1932, Ansel and some of his buddies, his photographer buddies, started a photo club out in California, and they called that club F64, Group F64. And their philosophy was that we shoot everything in focus. We want sharpness from front to back of our subjects and our landscapes. And Edward Weston, who is also one of those famous photographers that was in that club, was shooting still lifes of fruit and stuff, and he was shooting F64s. And there was another photographer in there that was shooting calla lilies, all kinds of calla lily flowers, shooting at F64. And that was their idea, that we want maximum depth of field. We are going to go to the highest f-stop. I've had people say, well, yeah, but they were shooting with large format cameras. It doesn't matter. Still, the principle was the same. If they want maximum depth of field, they go to the highest f-stop. So that's basically what I was doing. Now, with that diffraction, we do get some softness when it comes out of the camera. Now, it's not blurry softness. It's just a little bit of softness in the details, all right? You have to really blow it up to see it. Now, we have what they call sharpening tools in post-processing. Every software company will sell you a sharpening program. Nix software, Topaz, Photoshop, Smart Photo Editor, they all provide you with a sharpening tool. That's what the sharpening tool is for, to sharpen your images if they're a little soft. That's all I've been doing all these years, is shooting those high f-stops and just taking them into post-processing and add a little bit of sharpness to make them sharp, okay? So a lot of people freak out about the high f-stops, and I never have. Actually, when I started out, I was self-taught and I didn't hang around with photographers, so I didn't know anything about it. I was just shooting at high f-stops to get everything in focus. And just adding the sharpening programs would correct that little softness that I was getting. So I don't worry about it. And if you look at my website, look at all the images where you see everything in focus, they're all done at those high f-stops, all right? All right, now we got to cover what makes a successful image. There's 3 things that you need to do to make a successful image. This is this simple. I mean, I told you the cameras, I don't care what camera you're using, it's not about the camera. Mother Nature creates all kinds of amazing artwork, and all we have to do is to point the camera at it and photograph it. It's just like a snapshot, really. It's not that difficult. But the difficult part comes in, we have to find the good subject matter. We got to find that good art that Mother Nature created for us, all right? We also want to find unique subject matter, things that are different, things that people haven't seen before, and that's going to set your photography apart. Also, we want to find good quality subject matter. We want to have subject matter has all kinds of blotches in it and decay and things like that. Good quality subject. And then once we find that good subject, we have to compose it well. All right. You got to make sure we compose it well. And then we have to have good post-processing. All right. That's a big part of what we do is the post-processing tool. So what are you feeding into your camera? Now, I just got done telling you earlier that I don't really care what camera you have, how low of megapixel it is, how old it is, how cheap it is. I don't care. They all do great macro images. All right. But it's what you're feeding into that camera that creates that image. All right. Now, if I feed into my camera some animal feces, I'm going to have a poor quality subject matter. Okay. I like the composition. I like the angle of the dark color of the feces. I like the lighter color of the tree trunk underneath going the opposite angle. So I think the composition is pretty cool. And I think the post-processing may be okay, but we're missing that number one thing, good subject matter. If I put this on my Facebook page today, I'm not going to get a lot of likes on that. I might get some comments, but maybe there'll be negative comments. If I enter this into a contest, you think I'd win that contest? Nope. No judge is going to pick this as a winning image, okay? Because it's got a poor subject matter. Now, I'm being funny here, but obviously it makes my point. Poor subjects don't do well. This is a good subject matter. It's a nice flower, but it's composed all out of whack, right? So you can have a great subject, but if you don't compose it well, and you enter that into your contest or your camera club or any other contest, and there's a judge judging you by points, you're going to get knocked down on points because you have a poor composition. So again, missing one of those three elements. The last one is post-processing. Now let's talk about the famous Ansel Adams again. Why was he so famous out of all those old-time landscape photographers? Well, Ansel had really good subject matter. He was one of the ones that first, photographed Yosemite and put that book out there of all those amazing subject matter. He had great subject matter. He composed them well. And he was a master at post-processing. Everybody talks about Ansel Adams' skills in the darkroom. They talk about he was so good at burning and dodging his landscape images, right? And that's what set him apart from all the other landscape photographers is his post-processing skills. So that's a really important part of what we do. And that's what made Ansel famous and the most respected and most well-known photographer of all time is because he had great subjects, he composed them well, and he had good post-processing skills. We're really lucky because our post-processing tools are so far advanced over what he had. We can do amazing things with our post-processing. Now this is an image that I shot at Cox Arboretum. It's just north of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'd never seen a subject like this before. And I'm always looking for something unique, a little different. And I got really excited when I found this because, again, it's something I'd never seen. And I actually have never seen it since that day either. Never run across this subject again. So I was really fortunate to be there on that day and photograph this. Now, this was shot at f/32, and that's right out of the camera. And you can see it's pretty darn sharp, even at f/32. But again, these things are really tall from the top to into the bottom, and I needed the maximum depth of field to get everything in focus. So I was heading to Cincinnati to do a workshop over the weekend, and I pulled into the hotel on Friday after I got done shooting at the Cox Arboretum, and I was excited about going in and doing some post-processing on this image. Now, typically what I do is pull out my laptop, and all I do is just add some color saturation. I bring the colors out a little bit more, and I add some contrast boost, a little contrast in there, and then I sharpen the image if it needs sharpening, okay? So that would be the typical post-processing I would do. But on this evening, I felt a little creative. So I pulled out the Nik software, Color Effects Pro 4 program, and it's got 57 different creative filters. And I started clicking through those different filters. It's just literally a matter of a left click on the mouse and the filter applies. So as I'm going through all the filters, I'm not seeing anything I like, but I get down towards the bottom and I click on a filter called Solarization. And when I click on that filter, this happened to that image. And I was totally blown away when I saw what happened with that filter I applied. Now these things are now emerging out of a black hole and all the petals are super highlighted. And I thought, man, did that make that image look really cool. Now this image is, I would say my favorite of all the images I ever photographed, because people sometimes will say, well, which one of your images is your favorite? And I always found it hard to pick a favorite, but this is my favorite. And it's because of that post-processing. If it would have been this image here with just some color enhancement, contrast boost, and a little sharpening, I would not even put it in my top 10 because I think I have other cooler subjects in this. But with that post-processing, I think it just took it right over the top. So again, good subject, composed well, good post-processing, all right? If you went to my website, you would see that the very first image that'll pop up my website is this image right here, because again, it's one of my favorites. Now, I was indoors shooting a calla lily, and just on my stairway, I put a black fleece behind the calla lily. Image on the left is right out of the camera. I would never show that to anybody, okay? It's not a finished image. That's the thing about digital photography, is when they come out of the camera, they're not finished images. You have to put the time in for post-processing. You can see that black felt is actually turned into a light blue, you know, like a dark blue color rather than black. And the flower itself doesn't have a lot of color in it. It's kind of washed out. But I always know that when I shoot these things that on the, you know, on the post-processing, I can make corrections and fix all that stuff. So on the image on the right, you can see that I've blackened down that background to a solid black. And then I boosted the saturation to bring out more of the color and make it more saturated. And then I actually used a filter that's a soft focus filter to soften down the lines that was in the petals of the flower. So again, out of the camera, they just don't look very good, but with some good post-processing, you make them look really nice. All right, now I have these two images. Each image is a feather laying on the beach and on sand. And I put them side by side like this on my Facebook page. And I asked people that happen to come across these two images, would you mind hitting the like button on the image that you think is the better of the two images that you're looking at here, right? So the image on the left, you can see, got 102 likes. The image on the right got 4 likes. I'm surprised that even 4 people thought that image on the right was better than the image on the left. I don't know what those people are thinking. It should have been 106 to 0, okay? Now the image on the left has a better subject matter. The feather veins had separated while it was lying on the beach. So you have this nice S curve. You know how we're always looking for S curves. And then it has this nice area that splits into a V at the end. And then this little grouping right here just kind of overlaps this other group right here. So it's a much more artistic, more interesting feather than the one on the right side. This is a boring feather. It's got straight lines, straight edges, and it's just boring. Now the image on the left also has some post-processing that I created a warm tone by adding some warmness, you know, some warmth into that image. So it has a nice warm tone to it. The image on the right side, there's basically no post-processing. So when you put an image with good subject, good composition, good post-processing up against a poor subject with no post-processing, that's why you get 102 likes to 4 likes. And again, I'm surprised that 4 people thought that was a better image. I don't know what they're thinking. All right, so that, again, makes my point. In 2001, I bought my first camera. It was a used film camera. And I bought some lenses, bought a tripod, head, all that stuff. And I ventured out to the local parks to start photographing subjects. And I remember running across a dead tree trunk that was a standing dead tree that had fungus growing out of the side of it. Now, I'd never seen anything like that before. And so I was excited, something to photograph and something different. The problem with this subject is it's not a good subject. It's a blob of white growing out of the side of a dark, ugly tree trunk. So it's not a good subject matter. And in the first 3 years that I was shooting a lot of poor quality, poor subject matter, okay? Because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just learning and I was figuring it out. And in those first 3 years that I was photographing, there's not one image from those first 3 years that's on my website today. 3 years of shooting, not one image on my website today. Took me to the 4th year before I finally figured it out. Finally figured out good quality subjects, good unique subjects. Took a while. Now look at this fungus here. Now that's good fungus. That's very good fungus. And it's also grown out of a dead tree trunk. So this is good fungus. and this is not so good fungus. So again, it took me a while, but I put it together finally that I needed to find better quality subjects. This is an old ratty fern falling apart, laying on a dark background of a tree trunk. Just a poor quality subject, right? You don't want to photograph stuff like that. Look at this green fern, beautiful, pristine quality green fern on a black burned tree trunk. This was shot in Yosemite in 2004 when I bought my first digital camera. I was heading to Yosemite, I bought my first digital camera, and that was a Fuji S2 6-megapixel camera that I shot this image with. Now, this image is the most successful image that I ever photographed. All the way back in 2004, my most successful image I ever photographed. It's not my favorite. It's not even in my top 10 favorites, but it's been my most successful. It won highly honored in the Winland Smith Rice International Photo Competition. It won second place image of the year on naturephotographers.net, and I won $1,000 worth of products. It's won in other contests. It has been published in Outdoor Photographer magazine in 3 separate issues. All right, 3 different times in Outdoor Photographer magazine. It's been published in other magazines. It was a real good seller in the art show business when I did that for 7 years. And Hewlett-Packard, you know, the company Hewlett-Packard, they bought the full rights to this image. They actually own this image for all advertising. It's been a very successful image for me. And again, shot with a 6-megapixel Fuji S2 in 2004, like 16 years ago. Okay. So when people tell me they have to buy a better camera, I say, no, you don't. Whatever camera you got, you really need to understand that it's not about the camera as much as it is about finding good subject matter, composing it well, and doing good post-processing. That's what makes a successful image. All right, here's some fan palms. You all know about fan palms. That's one thing I love about Florida when I go down there. I always usually go in April. I couldn't go this year because of COVID, but I typically go down there every April, and I do workshops throughout the state. And I love shooting fan palms. I just think they're really cool subjects. And because I'm from Michigan, I don't get to shoot those. And so I always get excited when I'm down there. But this is a real poor quality subject, of course. It's got a lot of edges that are all brown and decayed and ratty edges on the edges of the fan. And then you got different subjects kind of coming in and out of the frame. It's just a poor subject matter to photograph. But here's a really nice fan. That's a really nice one. I love how those lines radiate 365 degrees out of that center down at the bottom. It's just a really cool subject. Now, you all know, because you live down there, that these fans are green, but you can see mine's not green because I went into some software and I added a filter that created some different shades of colors, created more of an abstract look to it. The other thing too is that when we do find these subjects that are really cool, like this one here, or even that fern that I shot in Yosemite, they're not always perfect. In other words, there's going to be some little round spots on them. There's going to be some dirt on them. There's going to be some spots of decay. They're never totally perfect, okay? But the nice thing about our post-processing tools is that we have cloning tools and spot healing brushes and all that stuff that we can clean all that up. And I want my subjects to look as pristine as possible. The same as if you are say a commercial photographer photographing a model or an actor for the front of a magazine. You're not going to put their actual face on the front of that magazine. You're going to airbrush and you're going to do some things in there that are going to clean up any imperfections in their face. And that's what people want to see, a nice clean face on a magazine. So when we shoot our images and put them out there, we want them to be nice and pristine and clean looking, all right? Unless you're a purist and you want to show decay and all that stuff. But I got to tell you, those images won't do as well as the ones that look like this here that are nice and clean. How about this? Hope you don't shoot that. That's terrible looking. Lily pads on a pond, and it's got all kinds of yellow slime around the lily pads, and it's just not a pretty picture. And you're probably thinking, as I'm showing you these images, you're thinking, well, who would shoot stuff like that? It's a terrible subject, right? Well, I'm on 5 different groups that are macro related groups on Facebook, and I post images on those groups every single day, 365 days, okay? I view hundreds and hundreds of images on those sites every single day as well. And I do see a lot of images that look similar to this kind of stuff. I see some really poor quality subject matter. And I think the same thing. Why would you shoot that? That's terrible subject. But I have to think back to the first 3 years that I was shooting, and I was shooting clumps of white on the side of a tree trunk. All right. I didn't know the difference between good and poor subject matter. So I was in that situation like maybe some of these people I see posting online. Maybe they're new beginners and maybe they just haven't figured it out yet. So I have to cut them a little slack figuring that they just haven't, put in enough time into photography or studied enough photography to understand the difference between good subjects and poor subjects. Now look at these lily pads. Oh, those are beautiful lily pads. Nice, clean water around them. Now, this was shot in a friend's backyard. He had a pond in his backyard, and a storm had passed through, a real nasty storm. And as those dark clouds were moving out, the sun was coming out, and it was creating this really weird light on his pond. And you can see the highlighting around the surface tension of those lily pads is kind of a white edge around there, and it just created a really strange light. And those water drops on there, of course, are from the storm that went through. But just being in the right place at the right time, and he had beautiful, pristine lily pads right in his backyard. Okay, so good subject matter, poor subject matter. Makes a big difference. Now, I also like to find unique subjects, things that people haven't seen before. I was at the Chicago Botanical Garden doing a workshop there, and I happened to be in the greenhouse where the tropical plants were. And I was walking down this ramp that had a little railing. I looked over the railing and I looked down and saw this plant. And I go, wow, look at that thing. That is really cool. It looks like a spiral staircase, and it's winding down into a dark hole down below. So again, I've got a unique subject matter that you probably never seen before. I've only seen it once in my lifetime, never seen it again. So when I show this image to people, it sets my photography apart because I have unique subjects that people haven't seen and hasn't been shot to death, okay? It's like if you're going to shoot the same tulip everybody else shoots that's been done a billion times, you're not going to impress anybody. But when you're out there searching out those unique subjects, you can find some really cool stuff if you're just out there working it. Black-eyed Susan covered in heavy frost. This is a rare occurrence up in Michigan. We start to get our frost about now, into November, we start getting heavy frost. So this is a rare occasion because when the flowers are still standing in the fields at the parks, we generally are not going to have frost on those flowers. But we had a freak early heavy frost one year, and I grabbed my equipment knowing that frost is going to be on top of subjects out there and it's going to make those subjects look more interesting. So again, I've got a unique shot of a black-eyed Susan covered in heavy frost. Now, if we remove the frost from this flower shot, what will we have? Well, we just have a standard shot. Wouldn't impress anybody, but that frost really adds character on top of that flower and makes it a very unique flower subject. Now, I like to search out tree trunks that are laying on the forest floor that have holes or cavities in those old tree trunks. And the first time I came across one of those many, many years ago, I thought, you know what? We should put some flowers in that hole and make a natural flower vase out of that. That would be really cool. So this one here I came across, and this is probably the most unique of all the cavities I found. It was really, really interesting design to this hole here. But it's a very small area. You're looking at this, think those are tulips in there, and you're thinking this is a big, large area. It's not. This area is about 5 inches by 8 inches. It's actually very small. It took me 4 months before I actually came across a flower that was small enough to fit into that little tiny opening. Those are orange stars, they're called, and they're only 1 inch tall. They're tiny little flowers. And it took me 4 months before I finally found them at a florist, purchased them, went out to the park, and put them down into the cavity there. So that's a really cool shot. It's a unique shot because, again, nobody else does stuff like that. Another thing that I don't see any other photographers doing is watching the tree buds in the springtime. And as those tree buds start to open up, these little artistic formations start popping out of those little buds. And I'm out there every spring trying to photograph these little formations that pop out of those tree buds. Now, it only happens over a couple-day period because if you miss it, those just open into branches and leaves on them. So you want to make sure that you're out there right when the buds are just opening up. course, we're going to have a long winter here before I get buds to open, in April. I got to wait out through the winter. And if you miss them, you got to wait another whole year before you can do it the next year. So I always try to pay attention to the spring buds. But again, this is something that I don't see anybody else shooting. So it makes my images stand out because they're different, they're unique. All right, that's all I'm going to teach you today. But if you would like to learn a lot more and get more in depth with this, because there is a ton more to learn. All right. Now, when I do my 2-day boot camps, I do 6 hours of lecture. You only heard a little over an hour, maybe less than an hour and a half. So there's a lot more to learn about this. All right. Now, I started this macro photo club online 3 years ago. And the idea was that I would create instructional videos to show people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, videos are the only way to teach people. You can buy books, but it's more difficult to understand by reading and looking at pictures than it is actually seeing it happen, in a video. All right, that's why YouTube has become so popular, is because people learn much better through videos. Now, I have 235 instructional videos that covers 4 categories. So there's about 30 videos on post-processing, there's 37 on composition, there's 52, I think there is on equipment, and the rest of them is in the field videos, me actually out in the field photographing subject, teaching how to do this, okay? When I started the club, my goal was to try to get about 100, 150 members in this club online, right? Well, here we are 3 years later, and I've got 2,100 members from 18 different countries. This thing just expanded like I never, my expectations were 150 people, and we're at 2,100, and almost every day I have new people signing up. We also have a Facebook group for our members only, and you can go there, and it's just a place where we can kind of get together, share our images, and talk about photography, and just like a camera club, okay? But it's online at Facebook. And we also have sponsors. Hunt's Photo is one of our sponsors. We have 12 sponsors, and every month we give away one of the sponsors' products, and I raffle it off to the membership, so you have a chance at winning something. And the lifetime membership, you only have to pay one time. It's $99, and you never have to pay anything again, and you'll always have access to the videos and to the Facebook group and a chance to win something. I didn't want to get into some of these instructional programs you see out there charge you a monthly fee, or they charge you a yearly fee, and those can add up over time. Well, I just wanted a one-shot deal, $99. Now, if you're interested in joining and learning more about macro, go down to the bottom. You'll see there it is, tinylandscapes.com. That's my website. And you can go there, and at the top, you'll see some links up there. In the center, it'll say Macro Photo Club. Click on that link, and we'll take you through the steps to get signed up and and pay your membership fee. So, all right, I'm out of breath. I've been talking for what, an hour or something. Okay. So, anyways, let's bring our head person Michael in, and you can ask questions. We can open it up to people they want to ask questions, or even with Gary still here, we can ask him questions. Do you have any questions about equipment? Michael, unmute yourself. Come on in.
You didn't want to hear my dogs barking, but thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can see the chat, but we did get a few chat questions. Is it okay if we run this by you?
Yeah, you just read them to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So one from the top here. Okay, so what size background do you have printed? So you showed those printouts that you have?
That's a good question. And normally I do remember to talk about that, but this time I forgot it. So, but that's a good question. When I go out into the field, I have my backgrounds are at the size of 8.5 by 11, which is a standard print that you can buy, a piece of paper you can buy to print on. So 8.5 by 11 has always been large enough, because I'm usually shooting a single flower, a critter on a subject, and I just need a small background. So 8.5 by 11 is what's worked really well for me. Now, the backpacks that are being produced nowadays have a sleeve inside the backpack where you can slip a laptop or a notebook into. That's what they're designed for. Well, that sleeve area works perfect for putting our backgrounds into, so we can carry them in our backpack. Now, if you have a larger backpack and you wanted a larger print, you could make your prints bigger and put them in the larger backpack. But I've always found 8.5 by 11 works fine. Now, when you're indoors, of course, you can make them as large as you want because you're not carrying them out in the field. But I would just as soon have a smaller one to carry rather than big prints. But yeah, 8.5 by 11 is the size that I always use.
Do you mount those
Yeah,
or put them on cardboard or
as I
something?
said in the video or the program, I use either foam core, mat board, or cardboard. Anything that you can stiffen it off, and you can actually get this two-sided carpet tape. It's a specific tape for putting carpet down. It's two-sided sticky tape, and then you can actually put that on the backing and then just lay your print on there, and it'll stick right to the backboard. Or you could just somehow tape it around the edges if you wanted to, but the two-sided carpet tape works a little better holding it down to the backboard. Yeah.
Ah, carpet tape. I think you covered this a little bit, but there were several questions about what's the best macro lens, what should I buy, and one in particular was what did you use for those lily pad photos?
Okay, so as I said, the different ranges of macro, short, mid range, and long focal lengths. Most people, like I said, end up in that mid range, 90 millimeter, 100, 105, and it's mainly because it's in a price range they can afford. When I started out, I was actually using a 180 macro lens, and that's what I use for all my macro photography. But then I started to use these zoom lenses, like I was saying, that 18 to 400 Tamron zoom lens. Man, that gives me all kinds of working distance. It gives me as much as my 180 macro lens, and it also has the ability to zoom out. So if I'm shooting those lily pads on that pond that you saw, I've got 400 millimeters that I can zoom out and capture that. So that lens works really, really well. But if you want a true macro lens that'll get into that 1-to-1 ratio, then obviously you'll have to buy a true macro lens, and I would say either a mid range if you could afford it, maybe a longer telephoto macro lens, but the mid ranges work fine. And Hunts is giving you 20% off on the 90 millimeter and the 18 to 400 if that works for you. But again, full frame camera, you want to go to the 28 to 300 because the 18 to 400 is only for the crop sensor bodies. So remember that.
We got another question. Which camera setting do you use? Do you use program, manual,
Oh,
aperture, priority?
I shoot on manual. It's just the way I started out shooting, and so I do shoot manual. So I set my f-stop. I also set my shutter speed. But you could easily shoot with aperture priority. The main thing is you want to make sure you're setting the correct f-stop, and then you can let the camera do the shutter speed if you want to. So you could shoot at aperture priority. But one of the things that happens in aperture priority is sometimes the camera gets fooled by the light, and it doesn't give you the right exposure, and then you have to do plus and minus compensation. So it's kind of almost like doing manual when you start having to do plus and minus compensation. But a lot of times the camera will get it right, and you can just literally shoot at aperture priority and not have to worry about setting your shutter speed. But number one thing is you want to make sure you're setting the f-stop for the depth of field.
Do you always use a tripod?
100%. 100% I'm on a tripod. Now, there are photographers I know out there that are doing handheld, but they're typically shooting in the smaller f-stops so they get faster shutter speeds. It's very difficult to try to shoot in those higher f-stops because it's going to slow your shutter speed down and handhold. So because I do a lot of my shots at higher f-stops, I need to be on that tripod. And also, I've attempted to shoot handheld, and I'm just too shaky. I can't get a sharp image hand holding it. So I have to be on the tripod. And then again, shooting at higher f-stops, I'm going to have a little slower shutter speeds. Now I do shoot at my ISO on my camera is at 800 all the time. It's always on 800. And my camera shoots perfectly clean images at 800 ISO. But it does help speed up my camera because when you are shooting in those higher f-stops, you're going to have a little slower shutter speed. But even at 800 ISO, I very rarely have over 1 second exposures when I'm shooting. So unless I was in a really, really dark overcast day in a dark woods with a heavy overcast of leaves and it's really dark, I might end up with a 2-3 second, but generally I'm shooting a stationary subject on a tripod, and so it's not an issue. But 800 ISO is where I keep it all the time, and very rarely did I get an exposure that's longer than 1 second. Usually it's always way less than 1 second.
Well, you anticipated the question someone else just posted, which is about the ISO. So I
Yep.
answered that. What about extension tubes or extenders? Do you use any of that?
No, Matter of fact, Gary and I were just talking about that. There, I don't shoot in a high magnification, so a macro lens goes to one to one. Like I said, covers 7/8 of an inch by an inch and 3/8. That's a pretty small area, and I almost never shoot anything that small. So I don't even really use my macro lens into the one to one range. Now, if you were to add a set of extension tubes between your macro lens and your camera body, now you're getting into 2 to 1s and 3 to 1s and 4 to 1s and 5 to 1 magnifications. You're getting into really tiny small areas. So that's when you would, add a set of extension tubes, or maybe screw on a filter on the front of your lens that would get you into the higher magnifications. So that would be for the, I call them the micro photographers, to get into the really, really small, tiny bugs and stuff, and you're filling the frame with it and all that. But yeah, extension tubes would be good if you wanted to add to your macro lens to get you into higher magnification, or if you had a standard lens, that you can't get close to your subject, then you would put a set of extension tubes between your lens and your camera body, and then that would allow you to focus in closer. Now, as far as the quality, it has no bearing on the quality of the image because it's a hollow tube. There's nothing there to create any, quality issues, so it's just a hollow tube. But what it does is it just allows that lens to focus in closer to a subject. Now, one of the issues with using the extension tubes is that you can add on one of those. It comes in a set of 3 when you buy them, and if you're at a point where you want to get a little closer than you are with your standard lens and you can't focus anymore and you want to get a little closer, you can add on one of the tubes. But when you add that one tube on, it only focuses in a certain range, and if you're outside or inside of that range that it focuses, it's not going to focus for you. And that's one of the drawbacks to those tubes. And then if you need to get in a little closer to the subject, then you add on the second tube, all right? And that allows the lens to focus a little closer. And then if you want to get even closer than that, you add another tube and it'll get you a little closer. But again, every time you add those tubes on, there's a certain range it's going to work in. And if you're outside or inside that range, it's not going to work. So that's the issue with using tubes. It'll produce a great image for you, and it'll get you in as close as 1 to 1. But like I said, you're going to have a little bit of a hassle adding and subtracting tubes as you move closer and back away from those subjects. So, but if you're using a standard lens and you want to do just a little bit of macro, but you want to spend a lot of money on a macro lens, then a set of tubes would be far less, costly than a true macro lens. But you just have to learn how to use them, because I've had people that have used them says, oh, I put those things away because I can't figure out how to use them. And they're actually very easy to use, but again, you just have to learn how they work. And then once you learn it, then it's actually not a big deal, but little inconvenient compared to using a true macro lens.
Well, one last question, maybe we turn that over to Gary to wrap us up, or Larissa, if you have anything. But you started off, I think one of the first slides, you talked about the camera you used in the D7000.
Yeah.
When would it be time for you to go to mirrorless, you think? You probably looked at that.
Well, yeah, I did. I experimented with a Sony 6400 mirrorless, and I was kind of confused. I got to work through the menus and all that, and so it's not that I couldn't learn it and figure it out eventually, and it would be okay. But I was a little bit frustrated with all the menus and try to get the thing set up the way I wanted it to. The other issue is that I'm sponsored by Tamron, and Tamron doesn't make lenses for, at least macro lenses, for the mirrorless cameras yet. Now, I'm sure eventually they will. But at this point, they don't have any macro lenses for mirrorless cameras. So that kind of prevents me from making a move into the mirrorless cameras if I, going to continue to work with Tamron lenses. So that's partly what holds me up, is the fact that Tamron doesn't have any macro lenses. So, but I think a lot of people that were going mirrorless were going there because it was a lighter, more compact camera system. And as we all get older, it's just nice carrying less weight. So I think a lot of people were going mirrorless to help, bring down the weight in their camera. I've seen some pros that went mirrorless. I mean, literally everything mirrorless, and they're carrying a little bag instead of a great big bag when they go on airplanes and things like that. So I can see the benefit of the mirrorless cameras. But for me personally, I'm not having an issue carrying my camera the way it is now, so I don't really see any need to have to go to the mirrorless right now. And when I travel, I don't usually fly. I usually drive everywhere, so it's not an issue carrying with a bag of equipment when I go. So yeah, I mean, I see the future as being mirrorless. I think eventually everybody's going to be mirrorless, and I will be too at some point. But it'll be a matter of whenever Tamron comes up with a macro lens and it'll probably be for Sony because that's what they're making their lenses for so far is for Sony cameras. So and Sony makes good cameras, but I would try to find one that has a little less. I don't know. It seems like the menu system that I used on the 6400 was confusing to me. So I'll hopefully find one that's a little easier because I don't like anything to be too technical or, a big inconvenience when I'm using it. I want it simple.
Awesome. Well, hey, we really, really thank you. It's
Oh, you're
generous
welcome.
of you. Gary,
Yeah,
did
it's
you
my
have anything?
pleasure.
Yeah, I actually got one question. I got one question for you, Mike. Getting back to the tripod thing. So I've seen people they do bird photography. They obviously I've seen a lot of people handhold stuff doing bird photography, but for macro photography, isn't it kind of hard to not use a tripod to do macro photography? And if you someone who did not want to use a tripod, would you recommend a platypod?
Yeah, well, the platypod was good for like tabletop, and if you're shooting something really super low on the ground, but if the flower is 3 feet off the ground, it'd be difficult to use a platypod. You'd have to have it attached to something. Now, there are photographers, as a matter of fact, you know them, Gary, like Molly. I forget her last name.
Molly Isaac.
Yeah, Molly Isaac. And there was another one at my macro conference that spoke. I forget the other lady's name, that they only shoot handheld, but they're also doing soft focus flower photography, shooting in those small f-stop numbers. So they have really fast shutter speeds. So, and they produce really excellent images. But again, my style of photography, shooting at the higher f-stops, I'm going to get slower shutter speeds. So it's almost impossible to hand hold them if you're getting, longer than a 60th of a second. They always say you shouldn't shoot anything over a 60th of a second. And so for me, it would be impossible to hand hold the shots that I'm doing at the higher f-stops. But if you were doing like some of these lady photographers that do soft focus flower photography and they're shooting at 2.8s and 3.5s and 5.6s, they can get a fast enough shutter speed to take the shot and stop the action and get no softness in any movement of the camera. So that would work. But yeah, the platypod is really a cool product, and I use it indoors. I have a video on it that I put out in my macro club for people, and it works real well for indoor photography on tabletop. And then there are photographers that use it outdoors for stuff that's really low to the ground. But if you get into subjects that are taller, of course, then it wouldn't work as well. Okay.
I've actually seen people actually use it. Or they're doing a video on tripod now. I actually seen people doing bird photography, and they have a boardwalk, let's say the alligator farm, and you put the platypod right on the thing.
Yeah.
And put a lens on instead of using a thing.
Yeah, like they have a railing or something, and you can set it on the railing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just curious about that. I didn't know you could do macro photography without a tripod, but maybe I guess I learned something. But yeah.
But I think I think Jerry Jones might be another one that hand holds all of her shots.
Mm.
You know, Jerry too.
Yep.
But yeah, there's actually a few of them that hand hold, and I didn't know that they were hand holding. And then when they come to my conference to speak, they talked about they don't use a tripod, and I was shocked. I thought, wow, his images look really good. But again, getting into those smaller f-stops they're using, they get much faster shutter speeds where they can hand hold easier. Yeah.
You wanna tell everybody real quick, since you mentioned your Facebook page, since we have it coming up tomorrow, you want to tell people if they want to join your Facebook page about our Facebook Live tomorrow?
Yeah, on my personal Facebook page tomorrow at 2:00 Eastern Standard Time, I'm doing a live program with Noah from Hunt's Photo, and also Todd Nettlehorst out of Chicago, who's a macro photographer. And we're just going to do some question and answer type thing. We've had people that are sending in questions now, and we're going to answer those questions for them in the live program. But it'll be 2:00 tomorrow. You just go to my Facebook page, Mike Moats, and at 2:00, and wait for it to come on, and it'll be a live program. And then you can actually type in questions, and we'll answer them when we're there live. So that'll be tomorrow, 2:00 at my Facebook page, Mike Moats. Good thing to remind me of that.
Yeah, no problem. Since you mentioned that, I thought people might be interested. So,
Yeah.
That's really all I have. You guys if you have any questions for me, you have my email. Feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to working with you guys and building a stronger working relationship partnership with the members and everybody in the group, and look forward to being more involved with the group on a virtual level and being there to support you guys. So that's all I really have, unless you guys have any questions for me.
You've done such a great job. There's no questions. All
All
right.
So now-
Thank you so much.
Huh? Somebody
Um,
say something?
Yes, we sent out I sent to Kay the things that Hunt's gonna have on sale, and she'll be sending that out to everyone, probably after this meeting, if not tomorrow morning.
I don't know if you recorded this.
I did.
Okay. I was going to say that way for people that couldn't make it, they can watch it, you attach it to your club videos or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, gang, I'm going to head out.
Thank you very much.
for
Thanks,
showing up.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good job, Michael.
Good job, everybody. This is a good job. We got,
It was
well, let's see.
28 people.
Yeah, and I think they pretty much stayed the whole time until he was finished. So it's good. I think that's a good.
Nice job.
Great start. So.
Thank you.
And I'd encourage all of you to, if there's other things you'd like to see, let's get them out there and see what we can coordinate for you.
So Larissa, the
Yes.
video, are you gonna edit that, put it on like a YouTube, get a link so we can just
Edit? Edit? I don't think so. I will get it out. I don't know if it'll fit on the form. It might be too big. Like I can do a YouTube or something for it also, just link it to a YouTube.
and then put a link, and that way, yeah, that's
Mhm.
space.
Okay.
There he is.
That could scare the cat.
They're used to her. She's all bark, no action.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Hey,
Thank you. It was real good.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
glad everybody came.
All righty.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good
night.
night.